So you're going to do some Buddha images tonight?
Yeah.
Hmm.
We sent you the link.
Huh?
We sent you the link.
Oh.
Yes.
I'll probably check that tomorrow, not tonight. Okay, we're back, Friday night class. For those of you tuning in online, you may or may not know, we've kept up the practice of starting the class at 7:30 and ending around 9, but the first 45 minutes here in the monastery, we do sitting meditation. So if you tune in at 7:30, you'll see kind of nothing on your screen. It'll be just us sitting here. Then we hit the bell, which ends the sit 8:15. 8:15 to 9, we do a text. When we start up more in person, those of you who come here will get a better feel for this hybrid, this dynamic of study and practice, practice preceding study, as it really helps settle the mind before we go into the text. And the settled mind, going into the text, a whole different thing comes out of it, emerges, that doesn't manifest or appear to an unsettled mind. And this is extremely important because these texts were delivered, or they say spoken, delivered from a state of deep stillness. The texts say a wondrous stillness, a concentrated, non-distracted state. Correspondingly, if we can approach something of that state before reading or going into these texts, that deep concentration, there's a meshing of the ancient and the modern, of the text and us. So this is actually not just sort of a complementary exercise, or kind of you're at the monastery, so you do meditation, then you do text. It's actually a key for opening the meaning of the text more widely. So that being said, I wanted to finish up a little bit tonight, because we didn't, on this idea of the fourth of the four Brahma Viharas, which is upeksha, sometimes often translated as equanimity. And the last time you're talking about it, and this is not only a practice said to be for sages and bodhisattvas who want to attain full awakening. So the four Brahma Viharas are gateways to the full accomplishment of one's deep nature. But they can be taken up in various degrees by anybody. And so they're wonderful. I mean, you take it up in a very simple way: kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. It makes your life different. If you take it up deeply, it actually turns you from a common person into a sage. So it depends on the depth and maybe the totality of how you want to practice this. You want to do it an on and off way, or a total way of being. In any event, the one that's interesting to me now, I think, is most useful in what we're living through. I mean, obviously, kindness and compassion. Wow, we don't have enough of that. And there's so much jealousy and fighting and competition that sympathetic joy would certainly be a good antidote to have. But I feel like none of this is possible. Even though I'm going to reverse them, I don't think any of this is really possible, the compassion, the joy, the kindness, unless our minds are aware of what's going on. And so I was trying to make a point last week, and I rushed in it, I'm sorry, but upeksha, although it's called equanimity, it depends on focused, centered concentration to work. And I mentioned that there's a near enemy and what's called a hidden enemy to upeksha, the near enemy being you mistake it for apathy and indifference. Your equanimity is sort of like, oh, I don't pay attention to anything, I'm not moved by anything, that would be the enemy of it. But the hidden enemy, which I brought up, I think is, and this isn't talked about directly, is distraction, scatteredness. And therefore, it's hard to practice the other three unless you can attain the equanimity to engage in a detached way with the other three. Otherwise, kindness, compassion, and joy don't fully function. They have their own enemies that take over unless your mind is really focused and concentrated on what you're doing. So it's sort of like compassion without wisdom starts to burn out. And so that wisdom, though, requires an equanimity, because wisdom is seeing things as they really are and not being turned, but not pulling away from them either. You're right in the midst, but you're not turned by them. So what I was trying to say last week was this hidden enemy is so ubiquitous now in our society, in the processes of our life. We are hit with distraction after distraction after distraction. Our consciousness is tugged and pulled 1,000 different ways. And there's actually words out there for the language now called cognitive capture. Our cognitive functions are captured by external phenomena. Advertising, desires, fears, anxieties. It's also called consciousness capture. In other words, the eight consciousnesses that we use, the sixth and the seventh and the eighth, are taken over. They're basically robbed from us, or we don't protect them enough, depends on how you want to look at it, but they're no longer in the core of our being, and our consciousness is captured by something else. So this becomes really important, because then you understand part of why we would meditate before the evening class here is not simply to get better access to the text, but to be, and I don't know how to say this, to capture back our consciousness, to reclaim it. And this means mastering attention. So as we sit here for 45 minutes before class, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body all settle in to a kind of unmoving, not outflowing state of calm. Then hopefully our consciousness, our deeper consciousness of focus and attention also can be stilled and drop down and be quiet. When that happens, the field of our awareness, the field of knowing, then expands. It's really ironic almost. It's paradox. By bringing down our thoughts from 1,000 to 1, our understanding and awareness goes from 1 to 1,000. It expands out. And the thing is, we see it, but we're not caught up in it. Seeing is different than being distracted or captured by it. So it's a difference between a mirror, and my teacher would say Velcro. A mirror reflects, Velcro sticks. And so this thing that we're doing here with our consciousness, we're really exploring, in a modern sense here, forget the Buddhist religious part of this, we're exploring who's in charge of my consciousness, of my sense faculties, where they're going, what they're interacting to, who's in command, who's got them. Are they mine, or are they captured by something else? And so part of what Upeksha is saying is not only to gather back consciousness and awareness to a calm. The first step to doing this is to pay attention to what you're paying attention to. And this is what meditation is trying to bring out. If you can pay attention to what you're paying attention to, you have control over your destiny. You know what's going to be happening in your life, in your emotions, in your feelings, and relationships. If you're not paying attention to what you're paying attention to, this is allowing yourself to be captured, and you're pulled away. So this is really a kind of critical, I would say, psychological application of upeksha. Instead of thinking it as some beatific virtue that saints and sages do, see it as something very immediate. How do I take control? How do I take mastery over my field of awareness, my field of consciousness? Now, that doesn't mean you take control and everything's great, because you might say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was attending to all this crap. But that's the first step. At least you're aware of what you're attending to. So one of the things that's come out recently in this, and I want to go into it just a little bit, I talked to you that there's some studies on now in the COVID pandemic isolation event that's happening, that a lot of people are having emotional, psychological difficulties, and they call it languishing. It's not quite depression, but it's not flourishing either. It's a kind of languishing, a kind of blah, uninspired, kind of lost feeling. Now, what they discovered is there's something called flow, F-L-O-W, and I'm going to talk about this tonight because this is not a new concept, it's just being rediscovered. The original concept, this goes back to a psychologist at the University of Chicago in the late 60s, early 70s called Csikszentmihalyi. And he came up with something called flow theory. So this is being brought big, and I'll say a little bit about this tonight because it's kind of Buddhist and kind of not. So I just want to go into this a little bit. But flow, according to Csikszentmihalyi, is the state of absorption in a meaningful challenge or momentary bond with some activity. Okay, so it's an absorption. And your sense of time and place then starts to melt away. So it's an absorption into something that's meaningful, something that draws and holds your attention, so much so that your sense of time and place and even self melts away. And what they found was that people that were able to engage in some element of this flow, whether they were trained to do it or they just naturally stumbled upon it, actually was the best predictor of well-being during this pandemic, psychological well-being. And so they begin to discover people that became immersed in these different projects that we're doing managed to avoid the languishing. And actually at some points even could get some flourishing going. So although the pandemic was shutting down their world, they found a way through flow, through focus, to actually not be swept up in that ennui, in that depressive, languishing state. And so people who had a meditative practice or a yoga practice, who maybe were artists or so forth, absorbed themselves into their projects or their work, and as a result, the time and place of, I can't go out, that's place, and time is, oh, it's day after day the same, didn't knock them off their keisters. They were just entered this state of flow and actually flourished. And what the researchers found, but it is hard, and I'm quoting from the report on this that came through the New York Times, it's hard to flow if you cannot focus. I mean, it's like, duh, but it's really, you cannot flow unless you can focus. So people say, well, then, but what they started to realize is focus is an endangered resource. Focus is one of the most endangered. We talk about the release of carbon emissions and so forth, and we talk about the loss of precious resources, but one of the most precious resources on the ground of our very being is our inability to focus. We can't do it much anymore. It's a lost, we call it an art because it seems so far out, but it's a lost human quality. It's not even necessarily always been an art. It becomes an art only in its deficiency, only in its lack of practice. Now it becomes something only artists can do, only monks can do. They can focus, but I can't. They found that when they were doing this study, people are checking their email, not to say their text. And some of you are going, email, what's that? Like, okay, so email, it's, so many people are tugged into Snapchat and text and whatnot, that they don't even do email. But those who are doing email, minimum 74 times a day, they're checking in on their email. And they switch task basically on average every 10 minutes. So the average person is just a scatterbag, checking outside emails, text, and whatnot. Pretty soon, if we get hardwired sufficiently cybery, the cyborg kind of phenomena, where we have actually neurological interface with technology computers, we won't even have to check our email. We won't even have to answer our text because in our brain, actually, a bing will go off and the message will come to us in a cognitive, and some people say, wow, I'm going to I'm going to put stock in that because that's the future. Yeah, but the problem is it'll ruin the human. It'll ruin humanity. You know, and some people make a lot of money. Some people are making a lot of money now ruining humanity. But nevertheless, I don't want to go down the road. What I'm just saying is fragmented attention is the enemy of engagement and excellence. Say it again. Fragmented attention is the enemy of engagement and excellence. And of course, focused attention, and I'm going to put here the Buddhist caveat, can be the friend of engagement and excellence. It's not necessarily so. And this is where there's a little flaw to the flow theory. Computers may actually be better for this parallel multitask, parallel processing, they call it, but humans are better in serial processing, one thing to another, building in a continuum. And so it's almost like, instead of seeing these blocks of time that nothing's happening, you see them as treasures to guard. The uninterrupted blocks of time are treasures to guard. And most people now, in the distracted habituation, uninterrupted blocks of times are sources of depression and languishing and anxiety and fear. I gotta fill the space with something, instead of seeing them as treasures. It's like the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, everybody knows the value of what is, but few can cherish the value of what is not. And he meant by this, in stillness is this opportunity for excellence. So, I want to say a little more about this. The reason I know a little more about this is because a close friend of mine and a colleague, Mark Csikszentmihalyi, is the son of Csikszentmihalyi, the father, who came up with flow theory. And he teaches here at UC Berkeley, Cal, in Chinese religions. And so we have a very interesting, and it's interesting that the son went into that, but I don't know what that's about. Anyhow, his father developed this, it's a zone, they call it being in the zone, when you're in the flow, you're in the zone, as the language used. It's a mental state in which a person performing some activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus. Fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus. You have full involvement and enjoyment in the process of the activity. It's characterized by complete absorption in what you do, resulting in a transformation of time and place and even self. So this is interesting. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the father, developed this in 1975 and went on to make this a huge focus of his life. And it's being still used today in various kinds of therapies and understanding systems. And now it's coming back in terms of the modern response to the COVID ennui. But even Mihaly, who came up with this, had a cautionary note. And I think this is where the Buddhist element comes in. He says you have to be very careful not to conflate flow, the focused attention, to what he called hyperfocus. Basically, not all focus is flow. Now I'm adding the Buddhist element. Some focus can be outflow. And this is where I just say a few words. Hyperfocus is what he felt was approaching something that was closer to obsession. You're spending too much time focused, even pleasurably absorbed in one aspect or one dimension, a video game, gambling, playing the stock market, even in emotional centering focus on revenge or wanting to be number one, so that almost all other things don't even enter your field of awareness except that monolithic, homogeneous attention to one thing. And he said, in that case, hyperfocus, instead of liberating, captures the person, causing them to appear unfocused in everything else, but focused in this one thing. And he says it also then can lead to anxiety, addiction, a draining, a fatigue, and a haunting emptiness. These are, by the way, the very descriptions you give to outflowing. So when your essential energy, which is concentrated in meditation, comes together, you feel a fullness. You feel a freedom from anxiety. You feel an energy, and you feel engaged. The opposite is outflowing. So one has to be very careful to make this distinction. Flow is not outflow. Meditation is flow, but not all flow is meditation. That's why the texts talk about proper meditation and what they call deviant or off-center meditation. Just because you're focused in your meditation practice does not produce this, what we might call flow. In other words, you might say samadhi, okay, for flow. It doesn't produce samadhi, it actually produces the opposite. It's an outflowing, and it leads to klesha and afflictions. So one way, I can't go into this a great deal, I just want people to kind of think about this a little bit, because it's very tempting to think, I can relieve my anxiety and my stress and my boredom by following this flow theory, and then end up in what Buddhists would call an outflow concentration. You start to go online, you become addicted to something online, or you set off on accomplishing some very hard to obtain goal. Extreme sports, for example, you want to climb rock faces without any support. You get a flow, you get an adrenaline going, but the result is not a liberation. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's an enchainment. And there's no real deep satisfaction because it hasn't actually liberated you from klesha, but actually just narrowed your kleshas down to one or the other. The other way to look at this is very important, and we could talk about it a lot, but there's a notion in Buddhism of kushala and akushala. In other words, concentration or focus grounded in kushala, which is wholesomeness, goodness, precepts, towards well-being, then produces the liberated flourishing that's talked about. However, if it's not precepted, if it's not properly aligned in terms of ethics and conscience and morality and intentionality being wholesome and pure, that focus and concentration not only will not produce flourishing, but it could produce its opposite. And the texts say this is clearly what leads to the 6 evil destinies. So this isn't actually, so now we're back to consciousness being the determiner of our lives and our destiny. With kushala and wholesomeness and a sort of grounded non-outflow focus, you ascend. With akushala and bad intention and escapism in your mind, the flow and concentration actually becomes an enemy. But you have a momentary sense that everything is better than it was because you're temporarily focused. And so you have a little rush, a little satisfaction during this. Long term, though, you're actually become a victim of your own concentration. So I just wanted to say that tonight a little bit because I didn't want to treat this superficially. It can be a very powerful tool, but you have to ground it in other tools, I would say, from this wisdom tradition in order to make it something that doesn't become an escapism, what T.S. Eliot calls distracted from distraction by distraction. You were going to ask something?
So did he actually give some markers for how do you distinguish between hyper-focus and...
I'll have to go back and look at his work and maybe talk to Mark, who's I haven't had a conversation with in a while, but he did notice early on that not all focus was flow. Mm-hmm. Some focus, but he used the word hyper-focus, which you could say is hyped focus. So it's sort of like ADD. It's a kind of narrow focusing that immediately gives you a sense of relief from stress and other things, but at the time it actually isolates you into a tunnel of unawareness.
Or addictive focus.
Well, it's addictive. In other words, in his language, it was very interesting. He says it captures you. So if you're using, let's use that language, Jinchuan. If you're using it right, it allows you to capture and corral your consciousness and then use it effectively as a powerful tool of inquiry, of growth and development. If in terms you go to the hyper-focus, it captures you. And so you could see very easily somebody who they think they're getting flow from a drug. And we were talking to someone today where this guy was like, oh, he was so cool. He was so, whoa, he was in the flow, but it was methamphetamine, crystal meth. And so after a while, he couldn't even eat or wear his clothes because he was captured so much by the states that this produced. In other words, he literally flowed out. And this is what outflowing means in Buddhism. So if it's proper focus, you should have this flourishing, this fullness, this sense of well-being. Your relationships with other people should get better, not more fractious and worse. Your priorities become very clear. You're healthy, that kind of thing. The hyper-focus turns into the opposite. You're jittery, you're nervous, you're other-dependent, looking outside all the time to bring this rush back. Very subtle stuff here, but worth... Yeah. I just want to read this passage from Eliot because it's really good, this line. But what Eliot saw in his poetic way was this was the state of what he called modern man or modern human beings, that through our technology and through our discoveries and through our overload of communication that was available both in literature and media and so forth, that somehow this had the adverse effect of not advancing us, but degenerating us. And here's how he starts this poem. He says, neither plenitude nor vacancy, neither fullness or emptiness, only a flicker over the strained, time-ridden faces. He's looking at the modern person. He says there's not plenitude, there's not vacancy, there's only a flicker over the strained, time-ridden faces. You just think, you watch people commuting, we're good. The economy's up again. And what I'm seeing, I go to visit my sister who's passing away, so I drive the freeway to get over there. I see strained, time-ridden faces again behind the wheel. Ooh. And he says, and then his line, distracted from distraction by distraction. Filled with fancies and empty of meaning. Tumid apathy with no concentration. Men and bits of paper whirled by the cold wind that blows before and after time. Wind in and out of unwholesome lungs, time before and after. Breathing in, breathing out, nothing. And then he goes on to a later poem and says, I measure out my life in coffee spoons.
What?
In coffee spoons. Yeah. So Eliot is good on the poetic sense. Csikszentmihalyi is good, I think, in the psychological sense. But I think the Buddhist sense can take us out of Eliot's kind of depressive fatalism that's here. He's warning to become better people. But I think Csikszentmihalyi's work, we have to really pay attention to his notion of hyperfocus, because in the Buddhist sense, that's exactly the difference between proper concentration and deviant concentration. And putting those all together, we might have some kind of strategy or therapeutic approach to what I would say recover the lost consciousness, to gain back. And then gain back, we can then re-enter the four Brahma Viharas. But we're not going to enter the four Brahma Viharas distracted from distraction by distraction. It ain't going to work. Okay. Enough on that tonight. Now, of course, we were going to go on to the text and everything else, but instead of doing that, I was going to maybe turn the last few times over and distract you. Chinwei Sure and Jinchuan Sure made an outing today to see some very rare Buddha images, I think from the Gandhara tradition. So they're going to maybe share that with you tonight, and we'll close on that. And then I promise you next week we'll come back to the Avatamsaka more directly.
You can also look on the, I guess you can look on the
Okay.
On your computer you can see it.
I can find it. Okay. Where would I find it?
It's just in your email.
Okay.
To
What
check
about
your
people
email.
online? How will they get to see it?
Locke is going to show it.
Okay.
You can see if it's correct, Locke.
You can see the screen there, to adjust your webcam.
The cam is okay?
That's good, yeah.
Okay. I see it's here.
So you have the, you find it? I can share
Well,
with
I'm
you
looking.
again.
I'm looking.
I'll share with you again, Marty.
Inbox. I have to. You can see I'm really technologically swift. Here's a way to do this.
去翻经传.
I seem to be connected.
Let me send it to you again. So, appreciate your patience. So, Locke, can you show the first slide? Okay.
You should receive it.
Yeah, I just sent it to you by email, so you should get it in about 2 minutes. Okay, so if we start with the first one, can you start with the first one, Locke? Beyond boundaries, yeah. So, Jing Weisher and myself, we went to UC Berkeley, the Berkeley Museum today, invited by one of the Buddhist studies professors, Alexander van Raspen. Yeah. Raspat. And who I think specializes in Indian Buddhist philosophy. And Feda, who is currently a graduate student at UC Berkeley, was ABD, all but dissertation. So he's finishing up.
Oh, I thought you said ADD.
ADD.
ABD. Okay.
Yeah, ABD,
Sorry.
all but. And there was it actually came about because we were invited to do a kind of class for their class on Indian Buddhist philosophy, just to kind of share about, do people actually use this philosophy, or is it just all abstract kind of nice theory? And so we shared a little bit, and at the end, people asked about Buddhist art, and Jing Weisher commented how he was really inspired by the art from Gandhara, because it has a kind of Western flavor. We talk about wanting to bring Buddhism to the West, but in fact, from the art you actually see, Buddhism has had a profound influence on the West. Right, you found it? Okay, great. Marty's got it. So it's actually this West and East kind of, you could say, dichotomy is actually maybe not so clear.
It actually happened before the Christ.
Yeah, it's happened before.
These exchanges already start happening. So we are not really pioneers in this field
Yeah.
here in the West.
This has been happening for a long time. So they call it Beyond Boundaries, Buddhist Art of Gandhara. And so we just started with just a couple of maps. So the first map. So you will see here, this is where the Gandhara is that little box. And it's the Kushan Empire. And you'll see below here is India. So it's considered Western India and part of Afghanistan.
So this is present day Afghanistan.
Yeah, where that was, yeah.
Yes.
And part of
Doesn't
India.
the actual area or city called Kandahar come from Gandhara? Kandahar, which is in Afghanistan, right?
Yes.
Possibly, yeah, I see it right there.
Kandahar.
Yeah, Kandahar right there. And
Okay.
then you'll see next map has a more modern.
This is modern, yeah.
Second, next one. Yeah.
Mhm.
If you click the arrow over here, you also move. Yeah, there you go. Go to the next one.
This is fun. I'm getting a tech lesson too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you see Afghanistan there, and you see Gandhara.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
right?
Pakistan and Afghanistan, basically.
Yeah, you can see where it's kind of, and then I zoom in. Next one zooms in, and you can see there's a lot of. I think all those are kind of maybe monasteries or stupas. During that time, there was a lot of Buddhist religious activity. So just to give you people some context, Jing Weisher and myself aren't experts. We went online and downloaded some photos just to give people context.
Those maps.
Yeah, but next we also looked a little bit at the history of the place because we thought it was actually quite fascinating, and this is what we found. So there's definitely a long history there, but we picked kind of just around this period. The Persian Empire was around 520 to 326 BCE.
This is the time of the Buddha, right? They started.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And then you see Alexander the Great came through to 326 to 305. So he brought a lot of Greek influence.
Almost 20 years. It was taken.
Yeah.
So it's
And it's very interesting. There's some people who were writing that one of his, I think, tutors named Pyrrho actually went there and then came back to Greece and started the skeptic school of philosophy in Greece, which is their philosophy is you use skepticism, like use argumentation to basically bring the mind to equanimity, what we were talking about today, to not have the mind get caught up in arguments and to always have a counter argument that allows the mind to not grasp onto ideas and dogmas. And some people say, well, that might have had a influence from having been in India. So then there's the Maurya, I don't know how to say it, the Maurya dynasty, and King Ashoka was in that dynasty when it was one of the kings, and at one point converted to Buddhism. So that brought in Buddhist influence strongly into that area. So this you really see is 273 to 232 BC. So it's, Jing Weisher said this is 250 years before Christ. So very early, right? Then there's the Kushan Empire, which we saw that map. And what's really interesting we found out was Vasubandhu and Asanga are both from Gandhara. This is
Right.
their, so we are very much influenced by this this Buddhist kind of area. And we have just two more maybe because in our tradition we have the Chinese pilgrims. So Dharma Master Fa Xian and Dharma Master Xuanzang both visited this area and they write
saw
about
all
it.
this,
They
arts
saw
of
the
monasteries.
monastery. So you can get a sense of the timeline. So next, Jing Weisher, maybe you want to explain this part, Jing Weisher?
This is the Apollo. You know, it's we can see later.
So wait, just say this is not Gandaran art.
Yeah,
this
this
is
is not
Greek.
Gandaran.
This is
This is
Greek.
the
Just so you know.
This is the Greek, and sometimes they're saying this is the Hellenistic influence. The Hellenistic is from that of Alexander the Great. It's emerged with Roman art and Roman Empire. So it's interesting fusion, that both Greek and Roman. And we see also this kind of in dialogue with the Indian art as well. So it's very kind of eclectic in some sense. Some people saying that the standing Buddha, it looked like Apollo, youth Apollo, with this very human characteristics, the human form. Here is another expression of Apollo. And here is the Hercules.
Next one, right, Hercules.
Hercules, and we see that one of the Dharma protectors has his face, what is very interesting. It's
So they adapted Hercules as the Buddha's Dharma protector.
and this is the Alexander the Great.
Can you follow, Locke?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So
You know, the other thing you see here with your
Hercules?
portrait of Hercules, I
Yeah.
was just looking at the top knot that you see carried over to the Buddha images of
Yeah.
the curls, right?
yeah.
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 And this anatomic, very detailed
The expressions are very
expressions,
realistic.
yeah, very real.
You'll see when we get to the Buddha images. You have Alexander the Great. So you see him, he came through and conquered much of the area. Okay, so now we're going to begin the Gandaran art section. And they just describe how the cross-fertilized character of Gandaran art is evident in the appearance early on of new forms of art inspired by Persian and Greek models, adapted and transformed to narrate stories of Indian origin. Conversely, at the time of the Kushan dynasty reached its apogee, says that, cultural interactions with pre-existing Persian, Greeks, Scythian, and Parthian artistic forms facilitate progressive Indianization of the art of the entire region. But it just gives a sense of how many cultures are meeting here to produce this art.
And it was very wealth region, the Gandhara, because it was the part of the Silk Road.
Yeah.
Linking to China, you can travel to the south of Asia, but also to the Mediterranean Sea. So it was a very, very wealthy place at the time, and very flourish in many ways, culturally as well.
So here is a very interesting.
Just as a note here,
Yeah.
the famous monk Anshirgao,
Uh-huh.
Parthian.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So basically, a lot of the Dharma from
He was a Buddhist missionary to China.
China. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Buddhist, I would say he was the first almost,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. I think he presented the first sutras.
Oh, interesting.
So this is
Earliest translator of Indian Buddhist
yeah,
texts in China.
Chinese.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we are
And he was the founder of the first Chinese
Yeah,
monastery.
and that's where you
Yeah.
have here the
And 42
Parthian.
sects.
Parthian.
Parthian.
Ah.
Yeah.
yeah.
He's coming from what's called Parthia then.
got it. So then you see here the first kind of piece here is the Buddha basically renouncing the kingdom. So you see the Buddha riding his horse out, right? And it's
Oh.
really well preserved.
yeah.
It's actually quite striking.
And behind you can see the kind of dancers. And
Yeah, you
this
see the
kind of
dancing girls
party
there,
Type,
party.
hyper attention.
Yeah, hyper focus, hyper focus, and he's escaping from hyper focus. He's
Into
going.
Cool how that comes out, isn't it?
Yeah,
It leaves that.
leaves this part. Yeah.
Yeah. If you go closer, it's the second image. You get a close up on the Buddha.
By the way, he's off to recapture his consciousness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing. I'm out of here.
That's exactly what he's doing. So if you look at the next one, it's just a close up of him coming out.
Ah.
But you could just see how well preserved it still is. All the detail. It's quite amazing. The next one we have just the Buddha being offered food.
Ah, look at that face. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you can see the nose is a little. You see the nose are usually much bigger, but this one's a little bit
I
broken.
can relate it.
Yeah, Dean Wish you can relate to the faces. That's what inspires him because of the nose.
Yeah. Oh, I know this guy.
Next one, you're going to see another picture of the Buddha.
Yes, and
Very classic.
And you can also notice the robes, what is very Roman-like
Yeah.
robes.
Yeah.
But also, again, it's embodied.
Yeah.
A lot of the later other Buddhist art tends to be very cold and abstractive, symbolic.
Yeah.
This is actually much more visceral.
Yeah. You can see
There's
the
your
face.
Apollo face, huh?
Yeah, if you go closer, you can see the face.
Mhm,
You zoom in. Next one. Marty, you see?
Yeah,
Look
yeah.
at that. So you can see the face. Big nose, right? Look at the nose. It's just, but the face is so gentle.
But look at the hair too, compared to your earlier ones. A little mix of both. But
Yeah.
There's a flow there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then the next one, this kind of image is actually the Buddha leaving Yashodhara. So here he's just sitting there on the
Oh,
bed, and
ah.
Yashodhara is lying down.
His wife.
Yeah, his wife. So he's got a halo there, and so he's thinking of leaving.
And she become in the future a nun, right?
Yeah, she's gonna none in the future.
He's leaving home after living alone for so many years.
The next one is the Buddha basically receiving an offering from his, I think he says, stepbrother Nanda. And I believe this story is actually, I won't go into all of it, but he's the one who he kind of got to bring to the monastery and then showed him the heavens and because Nanda wanted to go home to his wife, but so you have the heavenly rebirth in the future. So he said, the heavenly maidens are so much more beautiful. So he stayed to cultivate. But then later the Buddha brought him down to the lower realms and said, if you don't really cultivate to get free, then you're going to go here after you're in the heavens. And then he really cultivated to success. So you gotta see a close up of him.
Yeah.
But it's just, and all the images, you look at the faces on the right, you can see that they got mustaches, and that monk on the side, he's got a kind of a rough, it's just very different kinds of faces.
These could be very contemporary too.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
But you know what's here? It's not homogeneous. There's diversity. Each character has a different different persons.
So it's a fusion of cultures. And then this one's actually interesting. You have the Buddha in the middle, the Buddha on top, and on the bottom, what they said it's actually the 7 Buddhas of antiquity plus Maitreya Bodhisattva, who's on the last one on the left. And if you zoom, the next one I think is no, it's not zoomed in, but what you'll see is if you look at the 8 images on the bottom, and then there's 7 of them are wearing robes, and one's actually not wearing robes. So I think that's Maitreya.
So he's not the Buddha yet, right?
Yeah.
Fully is on the Bodhisattva path, still the future Buddha.
Uh,
Loving kindness Buddha, Maitri.
Yeah. And this one we thought was the most meditative. When we went there, it's like, wow, this one, he wishes I could just sit here and just...
Do you know that famous expression that somebody says, like, you're disciples of a great teacher, and so what you're doing, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. that expression. Look at this picture.
Yeah.
Standing
right.
on the shoulders of the Buddhas of antiquity comes this one.
That's
Wow.
right. That's
Very
right.
cool.
So the next one is, I was saying, you want to talk about it? Dingwei was quite struck by.
Yeah, it's one point. It's amazing to see so many parts, but I wanted just put some mat and just contemplate and meditate, just look at. And for me, is this one point is this contemplating this beautiful art, but I think the art is this also the mirror of the excellence of the mind of the artist, right? Like Marty says. And we can kind of see this is wow, that who was this artist who made it? This piece, right? How he cultivated this is work. This is the stone, right?
Yeah.
I think that many years of careful attention, right?
Look at that
To make-
expression.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
so relaxed.
Wow.
The body's just so relaxed. It's not, tense at all.
Yeah.
And the clothing just like it's just like on real skin.
And you
It's like
noticed
hanging.
he's in full lotus. Even the capture, the cover by rope,
On
the
right foot,
left foot.
left foot.
To me, that's a face of upeksha. It's kind of indifferent, but it's
Yes.
not depressed. There's a kind of world weariness to it, and yet a calm.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah, and the next ones we kind of zoom in. You can see.
Yeah,
Just was like whoa.
yeah, almost hitting you.
Yeah, he's.
They didn't say anything about the artists themselves.
No, they
all
don't know anything
Okay,
about it. They don't know
okay.
anything about. And then you can see again a close up on the face. It's just, you can just see it's. You could just have that be your contemplation. But this is, you said, it could be very modern, right?
Oh my gosh,
You look
yeah.
at this, this could be,
Some worker in
local
Berkeley.
Berkeley person would have done this.
But this, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is what I mean by embodiment. Why embodiment is so important. We can read the text, but when you see this, you can almost say, I want what he's having. I can be like that? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
This is a side shot. You can just see this. This is just the expression was so peaceful.
but you says Marty is something like human-like, right?
Yeah.
We
yeah.
can reach this.
Yeah.
It's not like far away from us.
It's almost like if it started to move and talk to you, you wouldn't be totally shocked.
So next is another image of the
Oh my
Buddha.
gosh.
But you can see the expressions of the faces are just really, it's much
Yeah,
rounder.
Yeah,
It's much rounder.
But this is a face I see, every once in a while. Every week you'll see somebody who looks just like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, kind of. but it's not foreign.
Yeah, it's not foreign at all. The next one is when the Buddha was practicing asceticism. So you see his stomach is basically collapsed,
yeah.
and he's got his ribs showing.
Face is eroded, huh?
Yeah, face is gone. And then there's giving offerings. If you go to close up, you'll see his
Oh, this is the maiden.
maidens, making an
Maidens,
offering
Yes.
when he's an ascetic.
Hmm.
Yeah, these are the more offerings. I don't
That, I'm sorry, that looks like Sherfu.
That's true. Now that you
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
That's an element of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I think those might be the 4 heavenly kings actually around him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, no, now I remember what that one. This is the request. They say this was the request for Dharma teaching. So after his awakening, the Devas came down to request the Dharma. Yeah, the Devas came down to request Dharma, Brahma and others. At least that's what it said in the description. The next one's interesting. This is Hariti, and she was, because we make an offering to her every day in the monastery. So she was the ghost mother who actually devoured children, and then was taught by the Buddha and became a Dharma protector. And I think she became again a goddess from the kind of iconography. So you'll see her. So she's kind of got a
Look at that face though again, my gosh.
yeah. So we have a relationship with her in all our monasteries, because as monks we're supposed to make an offering to her every day.
But I think she also represents one of the goddesses from Greek mythology. It was I have to check
Check
this.
it, yeah.
The name, yeah.
She might have got put together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's lots of
Oh, my
stories.
Lord.
So
this
this
is
the
a
layman
layman offering.
offering the flowers.
Yeah.
Ah.
But you can see it's just like, wow, this is...
Mm-hmm.
Or upasaka, we can say,
Yeah,
this is the
upasaka.
disciple.
The next one says interesting. It's saying it's like they weren't quite sure exactly, but they said almost like Atlas.
Yes,
Atlas,
yes.
Hercules, or Dionysus.
Yeah,
You-
but sometimes they have. You'll see some of the stone images. They have an image on the bottom holding it up, and
Yes,
they say
yes.
it's Atlas holding up the.
The world.
The
world,
world.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in the release, this one is a.
But you also,
Yeah.
just going back when I was working on this fellow called Paul Karras, who at the turn of the century brought D.T. Suzuki over when he was a young man, 19 years old, to try to introduce Buddhism. And they created an art contest. And they said, we see all these images from Burma and Thailand and China. What does a Western Buddha look like? And they had an art contest. And it was faces like this who won the contest. And they said, this looks most like the Western Bible history stories representing Jesus and his early disciples. You know, you look at this and say, I've seen that face before.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't Jesus more or less kind of from roughly that area? You could say
Yeah.
roughly in that area. So the next one is interesting. This is from the Jataka tales. But in the Buddha's past life, I think he had 2 blind parents, and he was taking care of them. So this is one of the stories
And
of
help
filiality.
them cross the jungle.
Yeah.
2 of those, yeah, is very filial aspect.
So Jataka,
Oh my gosh.
And this is Hercules.
yeah.
Like Hercules,
Like.
like, but is the Dharma protector.
Yeah, it's a Dharma protector. Kind of like we were saying about that image you saw, right?
You see the kind of seriousness,
Yeah.
right, in his.
This one was just some later ones, but I think also from the period, but I think around 500-600 CE. So I'll just maybe go through them more quickly. You just can see those are those are some later ones they had in the
You're
back.
starting to get a little more static now.
Yeah.
Marty,
Oh, this one's
Marty,
interesting.
guess what is that?
Yeah, what do you think this
What
is?
is this?
That looks like a Guanzi Zai.
That's right.
Exactly.
It's not focused yet. That's Guanyin Bodhisattva.
And this is Gandhara.
I think so. It was
Yeah.
saying it's in the period, maybe
Ah.
late, very late though. It said Avalokiteshvara. So yeah,
Wow.
and then just these are just late.
This one has an image of another image on the right.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is very. So who's looking at who here?
Oh,
This is very
this
interesting.
next
Yeah.
one's interesting. Next one's interesting. People can guess who this is.
Who is this, Marty? What do you think?
Not
Or
Amitabha.
luck.
I don't know who this is. Not.
Maitreya.
I was
Maitreya.
gonna- yeah.
Maitreya Bodhisattva, but he's got a mustache, doesn't have a big belly. He's very,
He's a
very,
middle-aged man.
yeah. So he's Maitreya.
Mm.
It's interesting, he had mentioned his necklace, his earrings are like lions.
So
And he's got his necklace, he's got
future
dragons.
Buddha.
They have a lot of adornments. This was another
We're
image.
so used to the, I would say, East Asian
Hmm.
and Southeast Asian imagery, the body language, that we feel a veneration and respect. But when you see this, you can actually imagine yourself as a Western,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, embodying, becoming something like this, which is more me. But it's not to say one's better or worse. It's just like what evokes that response in those who behold it, and then you expediently
Use those.
come up with not only images like this, but music and chanting and everything has to be reanimated.
It'd be interesting to try to find out what kind of music they listened to at that time. That'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, it would be.
Here's another image of
Very gentle.
very gentle face, kind of round. Yeah.
You says that it was
Yeah.
built.
I said look a little bit like Bill Clinton, but I don't know. Different people have different ideas. This is another image of another Buddha. And this one's an interesting one. It had, because they said kind of painted, and then also had gold film on it. And then below, you'll see that they said there's Atlas holding up the bottom. And Hariti, the goddess, was below here too. This is a story where a boy gave sand to the Buddha as an offering. He didn't have anything to offer, and so he saw the Buddha walking by and said, "Oh, here, Buddha," kind of pretending it was rice, and offered to the Buddha, and Buddha accepted it.
Soil. Yeah.
And then it was said on the relief that then later this boy was he wanted to be reborn as like a universal ruler, so he got reborn as King Ashoka. It's said. So who knows? You guys, the angle of him making an offering. Oh, here's the last one. So this one's interesting because if you look at the image, they said Mara's attacking the Buddha.
You see,
But you see this person has two faces. You have
Double
one
face.
face and then another face. This is a very interesting piece. They were saying that the Buddha's not in this actual image. But there's Mara's attack. Okay. Yeah. So that's it. So that's
I've got one I'm sending to Locke now. You'll get it, Locke? If you can load it up.
Oh my goodness.
This is,
Gandhara.
I'm just saying, as I said, not all focus is flow. Not all imagery is, how should I say, edifying. Can you draw that one up, Locke?
Yeah, let me,
Did you find it?
I don't know how you would mount it here. It's
You found it?
can you send it to the? Can you show it or not?
yeah, 30 seconds.
This some people will find shocking.
Shocking. Hopefully you don't have nightmares.
But everyone has a Buddha nature, right?
Everyone's doing nature. Oh my goodness!
Oh my God.
There's
10,000.
there's articles of this.
No,
And
no,
people
well,
actually
I'm
made
just
lots
saying,
of them. I thought
This
it's
is
a
where
real
you
thing.
don't want to go in creating.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Wow. It's not just. I thought it was somebody just did on Photoshop. They actually made a statue.
The question of the artist doing this was whether, obviously he did it for notoriety, and got a lot of notoriety, but whether he actually felt that this was an embodiment of Buddha, which is probably not the case, but more the possibility that even one could become. Anyhow, you just look at this compared to what you guys were just showing now, and you could see
the difference.
one depresses, one inspires. I'm sorry if I stepped on any toes here, but okay,
Wow. Yeah.
super.
So yep. Okay.
Isn't that okay? Let me ask you a question, because you guys absorbed this today. I mean, you were there.
Yeah.
There's a palpable sense that you got bathed. You got a like a rich diet of something. When you come back, you behold this. It kind of enters your consciousness and your body. When I go to something like this and I see this afterwards, I feel like, wow, I'm kind of excited and full. Often when I go to a museum with other forms of art and things like this, I come back with what the text called dust fatigue. I feel tired and
Yeah,
drained.
I
I've
feel-
seen, but it hasn't.
Exactly.
And so this is perfect example of a focus or that you get into that actually fulfills, as opposed to a focus that draws out.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And we had this experience when we were bowing to make a trip into town, and as soon as we got into town, just that dust would overwhelm you. This is opposite. I could look at more and more of these, and you would never feel that fatigue. What was your experience as you came back today? I mean, as you were there and then coming back, was it?
One thing that was interesting is, so when we were there, and it's definitely in a museum setting, so there's
Oh,
not really
okay.
really much space to just sit and kind of contemplate. But in the space of it, for me what's really striking about the artwork is you kind of get a glimpse at the, not just the image, but the kind of the consciousness that creates it.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, this one with the sitting Buddha, and the kind of just a relaxed face and the body, and you just kind of imagine, wow, just to kind of care, and you could say actual samadhi to be able to create that kind of artwork,
Yeah, I get you.
and you can kind of be in that kind of space. So to me, it's interesting how in the West a little bit, you know, we've taken these images and put them in a museum. So they become like a little bit like objects. So you don't kind of relate to them. So it's almost like, as if we have our Buddha images here, and it's almost like each of these Buddha images are worthy just to put it there on the altar and just kind of bow, you know, for a couple of days and just let that energy soak into the heart. So, but yeah, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, it's like Marty says, in this sense, for me, like we said, the Buddha speaking to potential using different kind of expedient means. For me, it was expedient mean, but definitely invokes some emotions. I can relate to it. It speaks to me, inspire me to some extent. But also I was a little bit tired, honestly, because you have this kind of rushing. I want to see all of it, kind of absorb as much as I can. And also that was the special day. It was the first day when this museum was reopened after the whole pandemic.
Yeah.
The first day also for first day of the exhibition. So when we came, it was just a few people, but later definitely you can see more. But I agree with Jin Chuanshi. It's kind of interesting to observe those statues in the museum settings, because museum remind you something what it's relate to the past, but it's disconnected with the present to some extent, right? And it's interesting and it's nice. We can measure, we can see what this kind of stone it is, what is the period, but it's somehow is disconnecting, from my experience, from this embodiment, what you said, the living part of it, right? And we are so fortunate to have these Buddhas behind us. Every day we're starting the ceremony, we see them, we bow to them. We have a relationship to them to some extent. And it's ongoing relationship, right?
This is a very good observation you make. There was a scholar who once called this butterfly Buddhism. And he said what scholars and museums tend to do is, like with butterflies, you collect and then you kill them, but you preserve them, and with little needles you put them on mounting things. And so what you're seeing is not the real living power of a moving butterfly that you have the experience, but a pinned, impaled upon a thing. And that thing that you just mentioned between, there's a kind of gap that creates that, as it takes out the liveliness of it. Whereas here, you see it every morning, you're actually close to them. It's
Very close.
Yeah.
And they have like different expressions. They kind of speak to you.
I think you should tell them we'd be very happy to house them here.
We're going to tell them. Yeah, we're going to have
We got lots of room, we'll put them in all the...
What is unique, and people probably can say it, they for now is, I think, just open for the UC Berkeley, right?
But I think starting next week, Monday, they said it's going to be open for the public.
Open for everyone, so I highly recommend it to come, because it's quite unique collection. Most of those statues are from private collections. Some have actually are borrowed from this San Francisco Asian Art Museum. Some even flew from Hong Kong. They say so. It's quite.
You guys did a great job of capturing this, though, on your cameras.
Yeah.
I hope that, like Marty was saying about this hyper focus, that in the future maybe we have a museum with humanity. And you can just.
Do you remember there's the last passage in the Platform Sutra where Hui Neng meets this artist who carves Buddha images, and there's that wonderful exchange? You remember?
I don't remember. I remember that incident. I don't remember what the dialogue was.
But the dialogue is something like, well, what do you do? I carve Buddha images. Well, can you make one of me? And so he goes away and he makes one of them and comes back. And I think the exchange is something like, oh, that's not bad. But then he says, can you make your own? Can you make one of your own? Can you make yourself into it? But I like it because it extols the value of art as a form of meditation and of giving. That you can actually be an artist and do things like this, and you are cultivating Dharma, but you're also speaking Dharma.
Exactly. Yeah, and how many centuries people influenced by that.
Yeah.
Generations of generations of.
And of course, the sad part is some of this was stolen. Often, many of these images, the heads were taken and the bodies were left behind. So when I was in the British Museum, I was seeing heads without bodies, and when I was in Asia, I was seeing bodies without heads.
Oh wow.
Ah,
And, yeah,
yeah.
this is what the two were separated. And then of course, the famous Buddha images on the face cliffs
Yeah.
near Gandhara
Yeah.
at that time were all blown up
Yeah.
by the extreme fundamentalists at the time. Just
Yeah.
a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
these
I remember
images
that.
were destroyed.
And for me, it's just another reflection of like everything is in flux and change continually. Because we think the kingdom would flourish in many ways. It was like, the top of the top at the time, right?
Yeah.
Artists,
Yeah.
culture, economically,
Trade, commerce, the whole thing, yeah.
And like I said, we read it that Gandhara period was 1,500 years. So it was not like 20 years, 30
So
years.
how long's the United States been going?
But it's have a beginning, have a
Yes.
middle, and have the end to
Yeah.
some extent. And it's, for me, seeing that also coins and with the king's faces and so forth, it's like,
The coins outlast the person. Wow, this is great. Really appreciate it.
Let's dedicate.
Okay, no announcements? Everything
Oh,
is
we
fine?
have, I think tomorrow's schedule is the same, except we're gonna allow people to bow the 10,000 Buddhas of repentance, so we're not gonna do the 2 to 3:30 Buddha recitation. And otherwise,
7:30 will be Avatamsaka
lecture
lecture
by Monk
by
Heng
Heng
Sure.
Sure from Queensland, Australia.
Yeah,
Have a streaming, and otherwise we follow our daily
Yeah.
schedule.
Great.
okay.
Okay.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the three jewels. Okay, so that concludes our evening